Welcome to Lawyers Who Learn, where we explore how attorneys' engagement in lifelong learning fuels their growth. Join us to uncover these journeys and gain insights for your legal career.
So Daniel, let me set the stage for what Lawyers Who Learn is about, so I can keep reminding myself each time and see how it evolves. But essentially, we all learn differently. As an attorney, you got to keep reinventing yourself and figuring out how to grow yourself and your practice. Continuing legal education is one way to do it, but it's not the only way. You are an amazing individual who I've known for a long time. And I haven't seen an attorney learn in the way that you have, and I want to kind of dissect that a little bit in this episode. So let's do it. So thanks for being here, man.
Of course.
Cool. So let's talk about early days of Lawline. Me and you are young attorneys. I started this pretty much out of law school, and you decided to start your own practice. And pretty early on, you said, you know what? I think I'm gonna teach some CLE courses. And I want to understand sort of what that process was, but again, I want the focus to be on learning and why you did that, what was the first course or two you taught. And I will just give the framework. You were one of the best rated presenters from the get-go. And so I'm just curious how that what is teaching the best form of learning? Let's just start with that. And how did you go about learning that? And what I want you to think about when you're answering these questions is one attorney. That's it. One attorney who wants to, in this example, do what you did and teach something. And so what can they do if they're on their seat's edge and they want to teach something tomorrow? How can they follow your footsteps?
So I have to, first of all, thank you for the very kind words. I have to sort of provide some context in what you said, because I think it's important, right? I graduated law school, and Proskauer decided for me that I would start my own law firm because I interviewed with them and they said, absolutely not. And at the time, there was just very few options I had. And I was surrounded by these sort of entrepreneurs. I grew up in Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn, and there was just a ton of general practice solos, like just a very different field than what you'd find. And I was close to $200,000 in student loan debt and had like sub $2,000 to my name, just nothing, tiny apartment. And I said, screw it, I'm going to do this thing, because I was surrounded by others who taught me and who were doing the same things, and they learned in specific ways. And one of the areas of practice that I got into was bankruptcy law. I learned bankruptcy law through going to the Brooklyn Bar Association and watching VHS tapes, CLEs of VHS tapes from two trustees, this guy David Doyaga and Gregory Messer, who I still know, who I still often refer cases to. And I learned through that. And I learned, unfortunately, experientially. So experientially, because I had to go out and do my own thing by default. And when you and I started talking, and you said, you know, I have this Lawline thing that I started sort of from the ground up. I know your father was involved in it as well, but like really, my father, he's like, I'd love to teach. I had no idea what in the world I was doing at the time, but I also didn't care. For me, teaching at that time was, how do I bring in business? How do I become an authority in something? How do I also do it differently? It was after where I passed the New Jersey bar that I had to take New Jersey CLE classes, and I had to take them in person. New Jersey, I think the first year you have to take them in person. And I went, and unfortunately, like, the panel was your typical panel that was personified in a beautiful movie called Old School, where you just had these monotonous speakers drone on, and they were there just because they were there. And I was like, this is the dumbest possible way to transfer knowledge from one individual to another. And, I had this kind of like Borscht Belt upbringing of like, who knows, why not? And I think that's why I was highly rated initially, because I think what was thought of as teaching was this idea of, this is who I am, this is what my resume says, this is why you should listen to me. And my thought was, I don't really know, but here are the crazy things that I've learned, and here are the things that I adapt to. And I think the personal touch, basically being honest with the audience, allowed me to transfer knowledge perhaps in a better way than someone that was saying, I'm over here and you over here should listen to me because I'm over here.
Let me ask you this. This is pre-ChatGPT, so you can't just say, create me a bankruptcy course and, you know, make it good. What was the process like actually teaching the course, and how much better or more knowledgeable were you from when you first started to when you've actually taught the course, and then you've taught several courses after that? Did you find yourself exponentially growing your knowledge because you were able to communicate it more effectively?
Yes. So the short answer is yes. The way I sort of, I don't know if you remember this, but I would constantly say, like, I don't know how to put these together, dude, these outlines, right? Because typically what you would find is someone would put together an outline and put in as many statutes and case law and everything else that they possibly could. I did not work that way. I didn't think other attorneys worked that way. And I thought it was a waste of 2 hours, 90 minutes, whatever it is, to just force feed very boring things onto people. Instead, I pictured myself walking into a 341 meeting, a meeting of the creditors, and what happens from the second I walk in to the second I walk out. The actual practical things that happen to someone that wants to perhaps go into bankruptcy law and practice on a day-to-day basis. And within that framework, I then put in case law, or I then put in means test exemptions, or whatever it is, to pepper it with knowledge. In other words, the story was significantly more important, and the transfer of knowledge happened within that story rather than vice versa.
Do you recommend, and the answer could be no, right? Do you recommend today teaching, and doesn't have to be CLE by any means? It can, you know, a lot of attorneys do it for biz dev and other areas, and they do it internally at their firm. Teaching specifically as a way to better hone your craft and being able to, yeah. So I'll just start with that.
Yeah, but here's the caveat. So I have zero social media. Like, I have a LinkedIn profile and maybe something. I don't even know if I have Facebook at all. But what I found, and this is why it's important, what I found is that people now teach as a means to X, Y, and Z. And because of that, some people are very thoughtful about how they're going to appear.
I'm saying in terms of teaching is the best form of learning, which I like to say.
Yeah.
Do you still believe that? First of all, do you believe that? And not forget about the marketing component. Do you think it should be all first-year associates, all solo practitioners should strive to teach something on a regular basis? No. Okay. So,
yeah.
So let's push that a little bit further. So if you were to recommend to somebody the best way for them to better understand sort of, let's say, bankruptcy, and understand that and communicate that effectively, because if you can communicate it, you've done A, B, C, like you've done a lot of things in order to be able to communicate it in a concise way, especially verbally. What is other ways to learn and get through that if teaching is not necessarily something you would recommend?
Teaching would be the byproduct of throwing yourself in the fire, right? And you throw yourself in the fire. So there's teaching and then throwing yourself in the fire. Was never sort of my thing. My thing was throwing myself in the fire, learning lessons over and over, and then teaching it to someone who I thought was not at my level specifically and purposely. In other words, much of teaching is taught in a way to make the teacher appear as if they're an authority figure, right? I go back and forth, back over and over, because I think it's such an important piece of this. If you go in the fire and you learn 3 lessons, and then you take those lessons and you explain those lessons to someone in a very clear way, they will clarify your thinking on certain things. I think what happened, right. So I think teaching is vitally important, but do I think a first year should sort of go into teaching because it's a really good way to learn something? No, I think there's other really good ways to learn things. I think internships are great ways to learn things. I think making mistakes over and over are a great way to learn things. In the second part of my career here, like I've been doing it for 17 or 18 years, I found reading has been an incredible way for me to learn lessons almost more than teaching, because I can learn from others' mistakes. But if you're asking me the best way to do so, it's honestly literally throwing yourself in the fire and making mistakes over and over again.
100%. Like, so, and we'll talk about that in a second. What I thought about when you were talking about teaching, another thing that you did for a little bit, and I thought it was really great. You had a newsletter, nothing to do with law, but it was things that I'm thinking about right now, things that I'm reading, things that are going on. And
Weekend
again,
fuel. Weekend
fuel. And in a way that you were teaching, you were sharing, you're giving knowledge. And so let's, there's something, is there something about you that constantly goes back to, if I learn something, I need to share it? Or, I'm curious sort of how you ended up there.
I am an introvert, and I can do the thing and I can do the dance and I can network like crazy, but it exhausts me. When I write something like Weekend Fuel, I want to connect with you because I think that there are other people like me, and I want to share these things in an authentic way. So it's interesting. I never heard someone say Weekend Fuel was teaching, but I think it was teaching, this idea of like, this is the one thing. So it was three things, right? This is the one thing I experienced this week, right? This is the one thing I read this week, and this is the one thing I watched this week. Tim Ferriss, who's a very famous podcaster, had that idea. It was like 5 bullet points on Fridays. And I thought it was genius because there was these bite-sized things. And so you did teach people. For me, it was learning. That was a byproduct. For me, it was learning that other people connected with me, not as Daniel the attorney, but as Daniel the person. And that meant so much more to me than, any win I would have had professionally or anything else.
What was, in terms of sharing your knowledge or teaching CLE courses, what was most impactful to you when, kind of looking back at it? Or let me ask you a different question. I don't like that question. But what's something you wish?
No, I can answer that question.
Fine. Answer that as long as it's not a general blah, blah answer. But what is something that you wish you learned earlier? Again, I'm constantly trying to, in my mind, think about the one attorney who wants to share more knowledge and wants to teach, but it's not sure how to get started. And so my goal in this podcast is to inspire and empower other attorneys to, it doesn't have to be teaching, but to learn something new. And it could be in a CLE course or it could not be, but I just want to open up the possibilities by seeing how you've learned and grown. And so for this moment, it's about sharing knowledge. So yeah.
When I did some of your CLEs for Lawline, I would have people reach out years later and cold email and say, I went into bankruptcy law because of what you taught and the way you taught it, and it changed my professional career. And like, I can't express to you how absurd that would be for me. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Do you know what I mean? Like, that someone would write something along. And I still get emails to this day that are like, hey, you taught this course. It was amazing. And thank you so much. And when people say that, like, I'm not humble bragging. I think it's because I was teaching it. And I think everyone has their own teaching styles, right? So it's important that they don't copy somebody else. But I think I was teaching in a way that connected with other people because I was in your face going,
yeah,
I don't know. And I totally messed up, but here's what I learned from messing up. And the other people went, oh, so it's okay to mess. Oh, okay. So you could clearly have absolutely no idea what you're doing and still be okay in this thing. And I think the connecting component is the most important component in teaching. Like, I think, I'm sorry, go ahead. You were going to ask.
I was just going to say, no, I love that. And thinking about, like, what is something a mistake that you made that starting your first course that somebody thinking about, like somebody who wants to do a course and get that going, like what are some mistakes they can avoid?
I don't think I made, I know it sounds ridiculous. I don't think I made that many mistakes going in because I was honest with the audience and saying it. I think I probably could have been even more honest and said, look, like I've only done this for a year and a half. So please don't use me as an authoritative tool on the
Got it.
know-how of bankruptcy. But there are not a lot of things that I did with Lawline or other providers that I would do over again, because I think that was one of the beginning of my career was the time where I just didn't care so much that the ego was actually lower.
So let's do one more thing on this topic, and this is a good one, and then we're going to go to entrepreneurship and law. And
It's
so,
a podcast.
so this so far. So each true Hollywood story, you know, it's somebody who goes up and up and gets really top, and then something happens and they go all the way down. And like I said, you were one of the most highly rated speakers as well as most viewed because of the way you taught. We asked you to do a couple of Bridge the Gap programs, which are in person, or at least they were back then before COVID. And you said yes, even better in person. And something happened. We had a Bridge the Gap. There were maybe 50, 100 people in the room, 75. I wasn't there, but I know it was usually around that size. What happened in that room for somebody who's such a well-known speaker in Lawline? I think it was, you had probably 40,000 courses viewed at that point, 40,000 views of your courses. What happened to you in that moment that sort of changed the way you think about teaching?
It was many years in at that point, and it was a course that was taught across the street from where I live. And I had done a number of courses, not just for you, but just generally speaking, I'd done God knows how many bankruptcy consultations with people. And I went up, and I remember the Bridge the Gap thing was like, I think it was like a 3-hour talk, something absurd, something really, really long. And in my mind, I'm thinking like, how am I going to fill 3 hours? As I'm doing the course right before, I'm like, there's just no, like, am I going to talk about bankruptcy for 3 hours? It's absurd. And I think 30 minutes in, I'm standing there, because you're always standing at these things. 30 minutes in, I'm standing there, and I feel like the blood sort of draining from my body. And I'm thinking to myself as I'm speaking about bankruptcy, like, oh, I'm gonna pass out. Like this is crazy. My heart's going absolutely crazy, just nonstop. It won't stop beating. It's going nuts. And I'm like looking around. I'm like, well, I can't. And part of me is like, just run out of the room. Run out of the room. I was like, camera. And I'm having this inner dialogue while this is happening in front of probably 75 practitioners. And again, I am this young attorney, and I'm minimizing my ego, but it's still very much there. I still feel like an imposter, et cetera. And I didn't know what it was at the time, but it was a massive, probably my first panic attack in the middle of this program where I'm teaching. And so for some reason, I thought of this, like there was a chair on the side, and I grabbed the chair, and I randomly came up with a line. I said, I'm so sorry. I was doing yoga yesterday with my girlfriend, and I completely threw my back out. Do you guys mind if I sit down? And for the next, I sat, because I thought if I was going to stand, I was out. Like I was going to pass out in front of these people. And that's my biggest fear in life, is to faint in front of people. No idea why. No Jungian therapist can figure it out, whatever it is. And I sat down, and I delivered the next, whatever, 2 hours in the most monotonous tone I possibly could. I did not stay after to answer any questions. I physically ran across the street, and I fell face down into the bed. And I passed out in my suit for about 3 hours because I was so spent out of it. And that was the first panic attack that I've ever had in the middle of that.
And looking back, right? Because
Yeah.
I think attorneys can relate to panic attacks in this profession. They're, stress and anxiety, and which leads to lots of different challenges. Substance
Yeah.
use being one of them is surveys show is a big challenge in the legal field. Why? What do you, looking back now, why do you think? Because I don't think it's just like, I didn't have time to feel. Do you feel you didn't, like you were overconfident because you've done it so long, you actually didn't come in prepped, and then you realized at that moment? But like, what do you think hit you?
I think I couldn't be authentic anymore. I think it's a combination of things, right? I think it's the stress of the day to day. I think it's being on for 3 hours and doing, being accessible, et cetera. But I really think I couldn't, that's why I didn't do courses again in bankruptcy for a really, really, really long time. Because when I spoke to her, I was like, Dave, I just can't be authentic. Like I can't do this normal thing, which is very, very internal to me. And I can't act. mean, I can, but it takes so much out of me that there's, I think, a mechanism inside me which says, stop right now. And that panic attack was that mechanism. It was like, you got to stop, like you got to cut it out, because there was only so many times I could tell the same stories.
So that's
about
what, so
yeah.
you felt like that, especially in front of a room of live people, I cannot repeat the same story for the X amount of time. I've had it. I'm done.
Totally.
And I'm bored and I'm tired and I'm exhausted and X, Y, and Z. Okay. No, that's fascinating. And it's interesting because you think about comedians, right? They do the same set over and over and over again. And they have to, that when you hear it, it has to feel like it's the first time that they've done it. And so that's a really interesting thing.
But they look at it as an art form. In other words, they're perfecting their thing because that in itself is the thing. This wasn't the thing. Like, I wasn't put on the earth to be a teacher. I was teaching because I enjoyed aspects of teaching, but it wasn't my cause. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. 100%. So, and so what is so this is Lawyers Who Learn. And so in that moment you learned that, what did you learn?
At the time, I learned that I really had to, I mean, it was a sort of epiphany to a certain extent in the fact that I just had to listen when something internal said stop, and that I couldn't crank it. And I didn't learn it that day because I had tons of panic attacks thereafter. And it was only after literally listening to myself to a certain extent where I was like, I just can't do it. I can't do this anymore. Yeah. Where they finally abated, right? Because it was something internal that told me, if you do this again, this is just going to happen over and over again. It's a shutoff valve, right? You cannot go in front of these people for the 400th time, act funny, do the same bit whatsoever, shake hands, explain to them why, they should or shouldn't go. Like, I don't know these people. Should they go into bankruptcy law? I have no idea. Should go into bankruptcy law. So that's what I learned at that point. But I didn't take that lesson that day. I didn't know what it was. Totally.
And sometimes you learn things looking backwards, right? And reflecting on what it is.
Best thing that could have happened to me.
100%. So you mentioned early on, you ended up becoming, going off on your own. And I've known you for years. And one of the things that I've seen you do is reinvent yourself. And so let me just ask you this question before we dive into that. How do you think you learn best? And just to throw some things out there, there's formal, there's informal, there's, watching videos, there's listening, there's actually, throwing yourself in. But like, can you think of a specific example, as you've constantly had to reinvent yourself, and like, you know what, this is an example of how I learned something, and that's why I've been successful in doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, I have two, but one's going to sound cliche and it's really not. I think that the first one, as I've gotten older, is books. And people say books all the time, but I really that is my only hobby. I don't play golf. Yeah, I don't swim. I don't do any of this. I read, right? I go to the gym and I read. And learning
Can you tell me the most recent book, or a book that's given you an aha takeaway that you can share?
Yeah, sure. So the Almanac of Charlie, I believe. So it's about Charlie Munger, who was Warren Buffett's partner. And yeah, it's Charlie. I think it's Charlie Munger's Almanac or Charlie's Almanac. It's published by Stripe and republished by Stripe. It was published before, but the basic gist is he was the closest thing we've ever had to a modern day philosopher king. And he had these wonderful truths which were so simple. And they apply to finance, sure, but they apply to life. And through this and through just tons of other things, I learned the value of simplicity, right? Not the 12 things to do when you wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning to bring, whatever or anything else. It's just that there are certain principles that continue to repeat over and over and over again throughout history and throughout life. And looking for simplicity is probably my top thing now.
Looking for simplicity in your day?
In everything. Simplicity in the way I practice. Simplicity. So to give you an example.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, to give you an example, like I used to want to bring in as many clients as humanly possible. That's dumb to me because it's not simple. that means a mental tax on making sure all of them are okay. I'd rather have 5, 6 wonderful clients in the real estate transaction that I can devote my entire attention to.
Got it.
At home, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just for running low on time. So the second, you said the first thing was reading books, which cliche. What was the second example?
No, the first one wasn't cliche. The second thing is a very, very deep meditation practice. And I know it's a thing, but I think if you don't do it by the numbers and you really take the time to sit, you realize how jittery you are and how many fears you have that aren't your own. And you start learning about self, who you are, what you want.
Yeah. Look, I've struggled. I'm working with somebody to help me increase my meditation. And when I'm in that zone, I'm like, oh, wow. And it's been a while since I've been able to get back into it. And I appreciate and respect that. And let me ask you this. What about as an experienced attorney, what's the last thing you learned?
It's more about people than it is about law. So I learned that emotions run every single business decision of every single one of my clients. And so I've learned to be quiet way more. So if I have a potential real estate transaction that's going sideways, lawyers quite often impart their judgments and they say, this is what's going to happen. I sit on the phone and shut up. And I let my client go for 30 minutes and they figure out their own answers half the time, more than half the time, I should say. As a younger attorney, could not do that because I want to make the other side feel as if I'm really knowledgeable. I have a little more confidence. And so I let that quiet space allow for these people to sort of work themselves out. And it's done wonders for me personally, for my practice.
I'm afraid to ask this question, but I'm going to ask it. What's the last thing you learned from a CLE course?
The last thing I learned from a CLE course is that if you put it close to mute, you can still hear the beep twice, but it has to be close. Because if it's totally on mute, there's no way, and no intern's going to do it anymore. So, look, I've learned that's really it. But from CLE courses, I can't tell you one specific thing that I've learned from the CLE
and that's fair, and that's sort of the challenge, right? Like, is it just in time learning or, moving forward? And like some of the areas that I think about is like when you're an experienced attorney, a lot of what you're sharing, and I think you're on the bit to say something. Go ahead.
Yes. You know what I learned? I learned that I want to do these things live. That
you want to attend live programs.
I personally, yes.
You want to put Lawline out of business. I understand.
No. I don't. I want Lawline to flourish like it
cool.
always has, et cetera. But I want to learn from people face to face, because if I'm in front of a computer, I have a really big problem of focusing for an hour and a half.
No, and that's fair because you'll be distracted by a lot of other things that are going on.
Do you guys do online courses?
No, and we're thinking about it.
You should go into that field.
Okay.
I feel like it's a bigger field.
So and I like asking that question. I like having, and today is not the day because, I mean, if I wanted to do a 4-hour podcast, I think it would be really engaging and interesting. And maybe if I get more than 5 people to listen, we'll get there. But I would love to have another conversation with you and others, really dissecting CLE and, what's working and what's not working, what can be improved and what can't, because I think, early on when it's been 17 freaking years since we first started doing this at a law school, early on, my thought was like, people just want to get their credits, right? And that's what it was. And then about 15 years ago or 10 years, somewhere around that, we started getting a daily digest of all the course comments every day that people get. And it's hundreds of them. And I can't tell you the amount of substantive comments, and similar to what you just said, where somebody is in transition in their career from estate planning to bankruptcy, or they're trying to do something else and they've binge watched entire practice areas, or they've just learned something new as an experienced attorney. And it was really important to us internally to know the impact the courses were having and that people are lifelong learning. So sorry for the commercial. But yeah, go ahead.
It's not a commercial. And I think you're completely on the money when it comes to that, because even for me, so I live in Connecticut now and I want to learn Connecticut law. And I was thinking I was like, do I speak to this attorney? And it just came to me that there's CLEs that are available. Like, you guys are the door to literally allowing people to transition their lives into different practice areas, different areas to move.
All right. And here's my question to you.
Yeah.
That's brought up a potential. Are you done learning substantive? Do you feel like, I think that's what happens with many of us in our career. We know, we feel experience, and you're not looking to get into a new area of practice, or you don't think you can learn something new, and you look and you don't find anything because so let me ask you, like, do you feel like, you didn't give me any specific substantive answers that you've learned, and at least in your niche, do you feel like it's hard to find something new to learn substantively?
I wish someone put together I practice real estate law almost exclusively. I wish someone in New York, I wish someone put together a class, like any kind of class that was done once a month, that just told practicing lawyers, transactional, and it could be for any area, whatever. These are the new cases that came down. This is what it means for you in your day-to-day. That's how I would learn, like taking these things, right?
Yeah.
And going,
here's something new, and here's how you can apply it.
Or not some weird construct that I'm just going to forget. And
absolutely,
that's vital. I gave you an idea, didn't I?
No, well, I think we've talked about this like a decade ago. Let me ask you this. So I talked about reinventing yourself. You're no longer, you've merged with other practices. I'm curious what, I guess the why, but I guess we can understand the why, like there's more opportunity, but like, what have you had to relearn about practicing law, working with other partners and merging with another firm versus working on your own?
I left my law firm as a solo, small firm, merged with another firm for 2 years, did not like it, started my own firm again with another partner from that firm, and we grew our current firm. There's about 21 of us now, with 2 other partners. What I've learned is like 20 multiples beyond what it was before, and it all centers around management, running an actual business, understanding employee personalities, understanding productivity, understanding how to make sure the actual name on the actual logo on the jersey is more important than the name on the back. There are principles that I never would have realized as a solo because I didn't have time. But
it's so interesting because everything I'm hearing you say, which makes a ton of sense, everything you're saying is soft skills, leadership skills, management skills. How much do lawyers need to focus on that? What?
I happen to be
totally. Now, how much does this only apply in your mind to those? Does this apply to everybody? As long as you're not like the first year, like how much of this side of law, of being a lawyer, needs to be focused on more? And let me ask you this: do you actually take courses on these topics? And we happen to have a lot of leadership, wellness, other area. We have courses on meditation and things like that. But have you ever tried, and forget us, but like, how do you learn besides just doing, which is one way to do it, but it's sometimes inefficient. Did you take any formal courses in leadership, management, scaling your firm?
Seth Godin had something called the Alt MBA. I took that course 5 years ago. I found it, or maybe more than, 7 years ago. I found it incredibly useful, and I forgot everything I knew in about 4 months, right? That's modern life. That's the issue that people face. It's not any of this. Of course, all of this is practical. Of course, people should be taking it. Not solos, because they don't have the time to do it. I was a solo, and I was like, I want to grow it. How do I grow it? But there's only so many hours of the day, and I didn't have kids or a spouse at that time. I think you can take whatever courses you want and you learn it, but I think the thing that people forget the most is that they just don't implement the thing, right?
But what do you do? What do you do? Like, is everything for you just trial by error? Like, besides that one course?
A lot of it. Okay. You and I, so I always follow your stuff. You and I learn. I think that speaks to a lot of people. You and I learn and we operate very differently. Like, you can read this thing and you could go, here are the 10 things I read from the book, and here's how I'm applying it to my life. I will read the same book and go, this sounds nice. And then drive the car and forget 7 of them. So for me, I have to actively sort of do the things that I want to do and see if they work or not. And then mentally note, this doesn't work with this person. This is how I'm going to do this. But going back to this, like, I think the Charlie Munger example makes perfect sense. Like, the simplicity, the things that I read in books, the overarching ideas about how to form specific practices. Like, I know we can't go, I'm using this as an example, we can't go beyond a certain revenue number, right? At my firm, we cannot, because we're not a business, we're a law firm, and we're a law firm that charges flat fees mostly.
If you hire more attorneys, you can, if you can get the business.
Nope, because the profit margins decrease at a certain point. And at a certain point, it goes beyond maximum effective dosage, and you start having people complain because you don't have enough people, because you have to manage more and more people. You have this thing that
What have you learned looking back at it? What is your takeaway? Like, what have you learned about that? Are you okay with that?
I'm happy where I am. Yeah, that I'm actually pleased where I am.
So let's end on this, and I think that's a really great segue. What have you learned about being happy?
What
have you learned about being happy? Like, you started that, but I think it's something that doesn't just come. And obviously, so I just want to hear some of your philosophies and how you got them.
I think happiness is a total and complete nonsensical construct that's come about in the past 50 years that have sold so many courses, conferences, books, etc. I think you have to try, and your North Star should be a sort of peace or an equanimity, where you kind of go, today was a good day. And then you go on to the next day. I think this idea that we should be in perpetual happiness is one of the worst ideas that's come about, and it's caused significant issues. I think, moreover, are you honorable? Are you ethical? Can you look people in the eye and keep your word? And it sounds hokey and it's old, whatever it is, but that is the basis of every single mutually beneficial business transactional relationship that has been good since the history of man. Like, Costco is just that, as an example. It's just low prices with good quality products, where the CEO of Costco can look a customer in the eye and go, I charged you a fair price for a fair thing.
Have you had to learn? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think if you take that and you run with it on a day-to-day basis, and you say, was I a good person today? That's it. That's my North Star. That's it. Was I a good dad? Did I show up? That's it. Because the happiness thing, I'm a Jew from Brooklyn. Like, this stuff doesn't work for us. We're not happy. Sorry, I can't say that.
I'm kidding. All
right, I was going to say.
That was bad humor. But I'm a Jew from Brooklyn too.
I know you are. Are you happy?
Oh yeah. You know what's funny? Maybe it's too late for this. I always wanted to turn these into like a co-host type program.
Yeah.
Because I wanted the guests to be able to ask me questions too, because I think I'm pretty smart. And I am very happy. I'm very happy in so many ways. I just have to remind myself that on a regular basis, because I think we have we all have this story in our head of who we should be. And there's the question becomes, so not to get emotional. Let's see. I can try to do this. I want to talk about my mom, because I feel like I want to talk about her. My mom recently passed away in May, and I want to talk about her a lot. And this is the first time I'm actually publicly mentioning her. And I think about, I guess what I'm going to say, maybe it sounds like a negative thing, but it's not. But it's like, you always think when you're going to die, you're going to be complete. You're going to have hit all that you've wanted to. Like, you're not going to complain about those 5 pounds anymore. You're not going to worry about this and worry about that. And I realized it doesn't happen. Like, my mom wasn't ready to die. She went into the hospital and died 26 days later. And there was a lot of things that she spent a lot of her energy worried about. And like the 5 pounds, which we all talk about. And like, I use that because I think about that. And my mom always would say that. And it's not just her, it's other people who I've known who've died in their prime. And what I realized for me in happiness is exactly, and it sounds like, I guess we're middle-aged men who are figuring this out, but while it's good to have that dream, I want to recognize that exactly where I am today is my happiness, like you said, because I don't want, what worries me is like being on my quote unquote deathbed and being like, oh man, I never got to where I wanted, versus I did a pretty damn good job and I'm very happy where I was. So sorry, I don't know what you asked or what I answered, but I talked about my mom and that made me happy. So there's that.
The one question, and I turned this whole thing beautifully. I mean, like, we should do it whenever you want, but that was a beautiful answer.
Look, I miss her, so whatever.
Yeah.
All right. Well, to end on that, cool. Let's continue the conversation. Like I said, I'm inspired by long form podcasts. I'd rather, if I'm gonna do that, I would like to do that in person. We're actually gonna open up a studio eventually, or an office in the city. So see how that goes. But as always, it's a pleasure talking to you.
I gotta say one thing before I let you go.
Yeah.
In 17 years of knowing you, I have to tell you, you were so incredibly authentic in your mission and in what you do. And I've met so many business owners that like, I want to do this because my, ROI is, but you don't talk about that stuff, man. Like when you get an email that says, this is amazing, my practice changed as a result of this, you genuinely get happy. You're not like, how much does this person spend? And that's a superpower that you have. So even talking about your mom or talking about these things, like this is really you. So it's been my pleasure knowing you all these years. I'll talk to you.
I'm not dying yet. We're good.
No, but I just it's my pleasure knowing you all these years. And it's my pleasure to get on this ridiculous.
Next time, let's start about the compliments to me, and we'll, because maybe I'll do a clip on. We're gonna do all this social media. All right. Well, thanks again, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, Dave.
And we're out.
Welcome to Lawyers Who Learn, where we explore how attorneys' engagement and lifelong learning fuels their growth. Join us to uncover these journeys and gain insights for your legal career.